أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد الأمين وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Dear respected viewers, thank you so much for joining us back on your live show, broadcasted live from the holy city of Karbala. Back to the basics. You're joining me, Yahya Seymour, in which we are discussing some of the key issues in going back to the very basics and taking a step back from the usual approach utilized by many of us in our discussions with those who have divergences of opinion, differences, or even major disagreements with ourselves. Those individuals may come from other religions, they may indeed be of no religion whatsoever, and at times they may even claim to follow the same religion as ourselves. And our heavy focus in this night, or in this program rather, is that we attempt to produce a decent contribution to this discussion through a spirit which is both in line with the akhlaq and etiquette demanded of a Muslim, but nonetheless respectful of the fact that we human beings have very limited time in front of us. And it's not always appropriate for us to discuss the fine mechanical, smaller fine-tuned details of what we could normally refer to as relatively preliminary issues. When I say relatively preliminary issues, I am of course referring to very small details in regards to, for example, the position of the imams, in regards to the knowledge of the imams, and in regards to the abilities of the imams, which of course are not the right and appropriate starting place for anyone to discuss with anyone that does not already believe in the institutes of imamate. It is literally the equivalent of any of us attempting to prove the prophethood of the Prophet Noah or Nabi Nuh alayhi salatu wassalam to someone that does not believe in God, to someone that professes openly that he is an atheist. Before we can attempt to even discuss the finer individuals who we believe rather are prophets, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon all the prophets, then it is indeed necessary for us firstly to attempt to define what prophethood is. And of course, because prophethood is dependent upon receiving a divine link and communications from a supernatural being that we all call a deity, that is to say a God or the God, then it is unbefitting for us to discuss with those who do not believe in a God or even anything to do with the supernatural world as to whether or not someone has received communication from such an individual. The point we are trying to highlight in all of this is that in any discussion, there are what we would call foundational principles, bigger questions, which must be addressed, discussed, and spoken about prior to us engaging in smaller talk in regards to very specific issues. In stating this, I am not attempting to undermine or by any means belittle what we would call these smaller or more sprung off issues from the bigger questions. Of course, those issues have their time and place, and their time and place will of course come the further we can reach in our agreements on the foundational principles. But before we can agree upon the foundational principles, there is no point in discussing whether or not something which is, of course, far from the main principle discussion between us, is worthy of discussion. Allow me to strike a brief analogy. The Quran, the word of Allah Azza wa Jal, it lays out a strict methodology for the Muslim to utilize in his discussion with the Christians. It states in its revelation to the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, say to the people of the book, O Christians, let us come to a common word between ourselves that we worship God and God alone. And this, of course, could have resulted in many different fruitful discussions. Some might think that the main difference between us is that we disagree upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But no, the Quran chose to focus upon the doctrine of Tawheed. And so there was a much more foundational issue before we get to the station of prophethood and whether or not the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the final prophet or is indeed a prophet full stop, according to our discussions with the Christians. Rather, that discussion is, what is the fundamental of this religion? Tawheed. That there is one God. What is the nature of that God? Is he a Trinity? Was the Quran oblivious to the fact that the Christians affirm a belief in one God, that they claim we believe in one God? Or did the Quran know that, yes, whilst their creed stipulating claim that they believe in one God, this model of monotheism is a deficient model. This model of monotheism forces us to deconstruct it and break down its key assumptions, which are fallacious, against reason, and inevitably lead to a belief in either three independent standalone gods or three constricted, restricted, and deficient demigods. Was the Quran oblivious to this fact? And if the Quran is oblivious to this fact, then we really have to wonder why the da'wah of so many du'at who affiliate themselves with the Salafi school of thought in England today are so clued on to this fact. Do they know more than Allah Azza wa Jal? And of course, I ask as hypothetical questions because I want to remind the viewers that the Quran gives us these principles and we are to stick to these principles. We are to stick to the principles. We are to stick to how the Quran teaches us to how to behave in accordance with the accurate tafsir, of course. And for my worldview, the accurate tafsir is the tafsir of the Ahlul Bayt, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon them, the original form of Islam. But something much more pressing affects us tonight. I have received numerous communications from brothers who are from the Shia school of thought, the Shia Ithna Ashari school of thought. They follow the same school of thought as myself, inshallah ta'ala. And may Allah increase us in understanding with one another, who have asked me whether or not I am overplaying the role of the intellect in religion. Now, dare I say those brothers do have much more textual leanings, but nonetheless, I think that it is only right that we do discuss this question. Am I, for example, giving out a smokescreen? Am I giving my own sole interpretation of the role of the intellect and how great a hujjah it is? I believe the answer to this is specifically no. But before we go any further, allow me to cite the narrations of the holy Imams, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon them all. In the book Al-Kafi Al-Sharif, by one of our greatest scholars, Thiqat al-Islam, Muhammad bin Yaqub Al-Kulayni al-Razi, he narrates from a number of his companions, among them Muhammad bin Yahya al-Attar, from Ahmad bin Muhammad, from Al-Hasan bin Mahbub, from Al-A'la bin Razi, from Muhammad bin Muslim, from Abi Ja'far alayhi salatu wassalam. Abi Ja'far, of course, being Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, who said, Allah, when He created the intellect, He gave it the power to speak. Then He said to it, draw near, and so it drew near. And then He said to it, turn back, and so it turned back. Then He said to it, by my might and my majesty, I have not created a creature more beloved to myself than you. And I will not perfect you except in the one I love. You do I command, and you do I prohibit. You do I punish, and you do I reward. So we see that Allah Azza wa Jal, when He loves someone, He perfects within that person their intellect, showing that the Imam gives a very high precedented rank to the intellect, of course. In Al-Kafi al-Sharif, it is also narrated from Muhammad bin Yahya, from Ahmad Muhammad bin Isa, from Ibn Faddal, from Hassan ibn Jahm, who says, I heard Ar-Ridha alayhi salatu wassalam, that is to say Ali bin Musa Ar-Ridha alayhi salatu wassalam, the 8th Imam, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon all the Imams, saying, the friend of every man is his intellect, and his enemy is his ignorance. Based upon these things, we understand that, of course, the intellect, again, is something very beloved to every individual. And the Imam is clearly pressing forward a very important precedent that we are to respect, to venerate, and to give heavy credence to the human intellect. And we can all understand why from the previous shows, inshallah ta'ala. Again, in Al-Kafi, it is narrated from Abu al-Hasan alayhi salatu wassalam. We have a group who profess love towards you, but they do not have a firm resolve, although they claim to love you. That is to say, these individuals claim to be Shia. And of course, the Imam makes reference to the ayah of the Quran, which states that those who have insight, those who possess intellect, are those who are recognized and tested. So we see the Imam places a very, very high emphasis on the intellect. Now, how could one possibly, after hearing these narrations, after hearing the narration in which Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam says that the intellect, al-aql, is that by which the Rahman is worshipped, subhanahu wa ta'ala. How could we take such a narration, and how could we take an understanding from that narration which says that no, the intellect literally has no firm role in the religion of Islam? More importantly, is it just me that's saying this, or is this something that our scholars have traditionally understood? For those who unfortunately belittle and deny the rank of the scholars in our age today, I have already cited the narrations of the Imams, and the narrations of the Imams should be a clear enough precedent for those who wish to doubt, who wish to put forward the claim that my understanding of the intellect is deficient. For the Imam has already himself given credence to the intellect. But for those who do show scholars their adequate respect, allow me to cite a Sheikh al-Ansari, or a Sheikh al-A'zam, as he is known within the Hawza today, in his work Fara'id al-Usul, in which he states, this is of course found in his great magnus opus Fara'id al-Usul, volume 1, page 43, وَالَّذِي يَقْتَضِيهِ النَّظَرُ وَوَفَاقًا لِأَكْثَرِ أَهْلِ النَّظَرِ إِنَّهُ كَلَّمَّ حَصَلَ الْقَطْعِ من دليل العقل فلا يجوز أن يعرضه دليل نقلي. What does that mean? He says every time certainty is achieved through intellectual certainty, every time we have intellectual confidence and certainty in a particular issue, then it would not be permissible, it would never occur, that this would cause confusion by conflicting with the text. So what he means by this is that there would never be a case where we would prioritize textual certainty over intellectual certainty. There could never be an inevitable contradiction and clash between the two. Inshallah ta'ala, we're going to take a very short break, but when we return, I'll explain this quote in further detail, inshallah ta'ala. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. I was explaining that there are those who, of course, do not take the apparent of the narrations too seriously and need to hear these words from a scholar. And of course, there are those who don't take the apparent words of the scholars seriously, unfortunately, in today's day and age, and so they need to hear the apparent words of the rawayat. We've already catered for the rawayat about the intellect, so inshallah ta'ala, allow me to cite one of the greatest scholars, recognized and given a seat of recognition within Hawza to such a degree that he is known as a Sheikh al-A'zam, the greatest Sheikh. This is what he's known as in the field of usul al-fiqh, or the science of deriving jurisprudence, the principles of jurisprudence essentially. He states in his magnus opus work, فرائد الأصول, volume 1, page 43. والذي يقتضيه النظر وافقا لأكثر أهل النظر إنه كلما حصل للقطع من دليل العقل أو من دليل عقلي عفوا فلا يجوز أن يعارضه دليل نقلي. And I've already explained that this states that it is known amongst the people of insight, amongst the people of perception, that once certainty is achieved through rational evidences, that is to say intellectual proofs, it would not be permissible that it could be contradicted by certainty from textual proof. وَإِن وَجَدَ مَا ظَاهِرُهُ الْمَعَارِضَةِ فَلَا بُدْ مِنْ تَعْوِيلِهِ إِنْ لَمْ يُمْكِنْ طَرْحُهُ. He says, and if it would be that the source is so certain, the textual source of course, that there is an inevitable clash between intellectual proof, that is to say aqli proof, and textual proof, then what you would have to do in this case is, if it became impossible to reject that text because it's so certain in its transmission that it's impossible to throw that text away, what we would have to do is what's known as ta'wil, where we take that particular text and we would have to say, for example, let me give a hypothetical analogy. That famous narration which is loved to be quoted by the opponents of the Ahlul Bayt, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon them, which states that on a night like this blessed night of Thursday, or the night of Jum'ah, for tomorrow will indeed be Friday, when those who come to visit Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam here in Karbala come, the famous narration in Kamil al-Ziyara, which of course is Khabr al-Ahad and weak, states that Allah Azza wa Jal himself visits. Let's assume that this report was mutawatir, that it was not only qat'iyyat al-sudur, but it was also qat'iyyat al-dalala. Then what we would say is that if this text is certain in its meaning, and it's certain in its origination, despite the fact it contradicts the intellect, then because of the fact that it contradicts the intellect, we would be forced to do ta'wil, we would be forced to interpret this narration till it matches what the intellect tells us. Why? Because Allah Azza wa Jal has given us the beauty of the human intellect as a proof which is established upon us. There is no way we can run away from the proof of the intellect. And this is of course the words of Sheikh Al-Ansari. So we see that this principle of trusting the human mind is not merely a principle which I have brought out of my own pocket. I've already stipulated in not last night's episode but the episode before that what the particular conditions of recognizing the restrictions and boundaries of the human intellect are. The ulama of the Hawza distinguish between two distinct concepts. There is the concept known as aql, which is distinctly that which we utilize to distinguish the three laws of logic: non-contradiction, non-excluded middle, and identity. And there's what is beyond that, where you have these people today who say, well, my intellect doesn't agree with that. Well, what does your intellect not agree with? Well, my intellect doesn't agree that I should have to pray 2 salats, 2 raka'at for Fajr. That's not intellect. That's what we call dhawq. That's your personal opinion. But nothing about the intellect tells you that you should not have to pray 2 rak'ats of Fajr. And nothing about your intellect tells you that when there is a wise commander who orders you to do something and has infinite wisdom, that you should disobey what he tells you to do. On the contrary, your intellect will tell you that you are obliged rationally to follow what he says. But just to entertain this question a bit further, I've brought with me today several books studied, gathered from the collection of Shia works available to us in this holy city of Karbala. All of them aqa'idi, and all of them premised heavily upon the aql, all of them utilizing rational proofs to demonstrate that this is not merely a methodology we have whipped out of our own pocket. Rather, this is something agreed upon by all scholars. This is a great work known as Kashf al-Ghita an al-Haqq bit-Tahqiq, which of course is by one of the scholars of Ahsa. Likewise, we have this work here, Al-Hidayah fil Bayan wal Ma'ani fi Ilm al-Hikmah, which is by a scholar known as Sheikh Abu Turab bin Muhammad al-Hussein al-Qazwini. Again, an aqli work. Barahin al-Imamiyya ala Masail al-Kalamiyya, which is a series of ta'liqat upon the kalam works of Sheikh Tusi by Hassan bin Ali al-Sa'id al-Bahrani. Again, aqli. Manar al-Arifin wa Baghiyat al-Abidin by Sheikh Muhammad Abu al-Khamsin. Again, aqli. Makhazin Jawahir Asrar al-Tanzil. Again, you go through it entirely aqli by Mirza Hassan Gawhar. Mujadalat fil Madhab, or yes, Al-Mujadalat fil Madhab by Ibn Abi Jumhur al-Ahsa'i. Again, an aqli work. And again, a work which disagrees with the approach of these scholars, which is called Ma'rafat Allah Ta'ala Billah. Again, going through aqli proofs. But for those who have never heard of these names, because of course in the West we rarely ever hear of these scholars, allow me to cite another couple of scholars who will of course be slightly more well known. This is a work in commentary of Al-Bab al-Hadi Ashar of Alama Hilli, again entirely aqli, with the exception of bringing in rawayat in order to prove the particular position which the aql has reached or the intellect has reached. And for those who doubt that, Principles of Faith, Usul al-Din, by the great marja, His Eminence, Agha Wahid al-Khurasani. Again, entirely aqli, with textual proofs to support that. This work, which is published by the Atab al-Abbasiyya, or the Shrine of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, Al-Kalam al-Islami al-Mu'asir. Again, entirely aqli. And below it there is a book by His Eminence, the son of Sayyid Ali al-Sistani, known as Muhammad Baqir al-Sistani, as Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sistani. Again, entirely aqli. So what we find is this approach of trusting the aql, this approach of prioritizing and giving validation to the intellect, is of course an approach mandated, understood by, and given to us by the Imams themselves. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon them all. And so any approach which goes against that aql, any approach which goes against that foundational intellect, that foundational gift which Allah Azza wa Jal has given us, we would see that this approach is a fallacious approach. Because for those who are obsessed with the akhbar, and might I add to this a small commentary and state that even Muhammad Amin al-Astarabadi himself, the very author of the work Al-Fawaid al-Madaniyya, he himself has several works in Ilm al-Kalam himself, published subsequently to Al-Fawaid al-Madaniyya, in which he himself utilizes the rational proof to reach the conclusions he has reached. Likewise, when you read the works of Sheikh Yusuf al-Bahrani, you would find that he also utilizes this intellect. And so for those who claim to be Shia, yet do not recognize nor give credence to the intellect, we would tell them that they have to revise their theology, and they would have to tell us why they do not understand from the Imams what we have understood from the Imams. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon them. And in them trying to explain to us what they've understood, they would be using their intellects. And so the process would again be circular and flawed. Dear viewers, thank you for listening to this brief clarification, and I pray you join us after tomorrow, which is our break for the week. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.